Welcome back for the second day of the Blair Sewalong. Today we are going to be sewing the optional pocket. So if you're choosing not to sew the pockets, you can skip today and come back tomorrow. Go ahead and grab your main pocket pieces. Those are going to have some dot markings on the wrong side of the pocket pieces. Now go ahead and fold those pocket pieces in half with right sides touching. And locate the notches at the top. Those should be lined up, and you are going to go over to your sewing machine, back stitch at the top, stitch down to the first dot in a normal stitch length, and then you are going to back stitch, and you are going to continue stitching, then add a basting stitch between the dot markings. When you get to the second dot marking, back stitch again, return to a normal stitch length, and continue stitching down to that second set of notches at the bottom. Okay, and it should look something like this when you're done. I hope you can see those basting stitches right there in between the dot markings. That's going to become our inverted pleat later on once we've removed those basting stitches. Next, we are going to press those pockets open. You are going to make sure that that fold is centered over the stitch line on each of the pockets. Okay, now you are going to grab your pocket linings, and with right sides touching, you're going to pin one main pocket to one pocket lining. You can match up the notches with that center stitch line on your main pocket and make sure that those folds just stay in place. Now once you get those all pinned, you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you are going to sew all the way around those edges, pivoting at each corner, but you make sure that you leave a 3-inch opening on one of the sides of each of your pockets. Now you just want to trim those corners and those edges to reduce bulk. Depending on how thick your fabric is, kind of depends on how much you might want to trim away. And then turn those pockets right side out through the 3-inch opening that you left. And then you are going to use maybe a point turner and some nice steam and whatever tools that you need to get some good corners and to press these really well. It's really important that while you're pressing, you are cheating that lining slightly to the underside just to make sure that it's not visible, especially if your lining is a really contrasting fabric like mine is, because you don't want it to be visible on the outside of your skirt. So don't worry so much if there's a little bit of excess fabric of your lining towards the underside. You won't see that once it's all sewn down. Also make sure that you have pressed in the seam allowance from that 3-inch opening that you left and that is nice and straight. Once you are happy with the look of your pockets, you need to remove those basting stitches that you left in. Those basting stitches are between the dots and those were for the inverted pleats. So I sometimes feel like it's easiest to just take my seam ripper and actually put it on the inside of the pocket, but whatever way you find easiest is fine. Okay, let's go ahead and attach those pockets to the front of our skirt. So you can use pins to do this. I actually find that the easiest way to do this is to use a very washable glue stick. It's just easier to place and kind of manipulate the corners and the edges of the pocket and to make sure that my lining isn't poking out at all. When placing your pockets, make sure that the weight of that inverted pleat is at the bottom of the pocket and not the top. And then what you'll do is you are going to be aligning the top edges of your pocket with that pocket marking that is on the front of your skirt. Once again, you can be pinning these edges, but I am using a glue stick. And just be extra careful with your placement. You want to make sure, once again, that your lining isn't poking out at all and that everything looks nice and square and that you have nice pointed corners. And once you're happy with that placement, you're going to go over to your sewing machine. You will backstitch at the top, and then you will go down and you're going to edge stitch around the side and bottom edges. And then go ahead and backstitch again at the other top edge. Okay, it should look something like this. Now once you have sewn both of your main pockets to your skirt, it's time to tackle the pocket flaps. Grab a main pocket flap and then also grab your pocket flap linings, and you're going to pin them with right sides touching. You'll go over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew the side and bottom edges, pivoting at all of the corners and leaving that top edge unsewn. And then just like that you did for your main pocket, you are going to trim the seam allowances down, really focusing on those corners to reduce bulk. And then you are going to want to turn those pocket flaps right side out through the top opening, and go ahead and just like you did for the main pocket, you want to cheat that lining towards the underside so that it is not visible. Give everything a really good press, use a point turner to make sure you have nice sharp corners and edges. If the top edge of your pocket flap becomes a little bit uneven, like mine did, where the lining started poking out and was no longer flush with the main pocket flap, go ahead and trim it down so that it's a nice straight edge. And then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to edge stitch along the side and bottom edges, pivoting at each corner and leaving the top edge of the pocket flap unsewn. And while I'm at my sewing machine, I am going to go ahead and also sew those buttonholes on the pocket flaps. Okay, this should look something like this now. Now let's go ahead and open up our buttonholes. I'm using a buttonhole opener, but you can open them whatever way you prefer. Okay, now that those pocket flaps are ready, we are going to attach them to the front of the skirt. So go ahead and grab your skirt fronts that have the main pocket attached. And these are actually going to be placed upside down with right sides touching a ½ inch above the top edge of the pocket. Now I find it easiest to go ahead and just mark this. Because of the dart, the skirt gets a little bit like curved and wonky there, so I just find it much easier to go ahead and mark it first. So once again, with the right sides touching and the pocket flap upside down, we're going to pin the top edge of the flap a ½ inch above the top of the pocket. Go ahead and pin that very generously, because then we are going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to edge stitch that 1/8 of an inch above the raw edge of the pocket flap. And now you're going to go over to your iron and you're going to press those pocket flaps down and over that seam that you just made. And then go back over to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch at a 1/4 of an inch down from that pressed edge that you just made, back stitching at both edges. Okay, now the very last thing that we are going to do today is we are going to sew on the buttons that are placed on the pockets. Now you're going to mark the button placement on the main pocket but through the buttonhole on the pocket flap, and that marking should be centered within the buttonhole. Now generally I like to sew on my buttons on my machine, and so I use my glue stick to kind of just stick my button in place so it doesn't move around while I'm sewing it. So I'm going to go ahead and place those both over the markings that I just made. Now keep in mind that you are sewing the button just through the main pocket and make sure that you're not sewing it through all layers and then sewing it through the skirt, and then you can't use your pocket. Now I'm able to do this on my machine just barely, but you might find it easiest to just do this by hand. There we have it. Our pockets are all the way done, and we are done for today. Thanks so much for following along, and I hope it was super helpful.